Welcome to this journey through one of the most haunting mysteries ever to emerge from the backwoods of Kentucky. Tell us where you're watching from now, because this story will chill you in a way few other accounts can. We're about to delve into a mystery that claimed at least 17 lives over the course of 3 decades, where a quiet creek in Harlan County became synonymous with death itself and left a legacy so disturbing that locals still refuse to speak its name after dark. It was the year 1937. The Great Depression still had America in its stranglehold, with unemployment hovering near 15% and dust storms ravaging the heartland. But in the mountains of eastern Kentucky, the situation was somehow even more dire. Coal mining, the lifeblood of these communities, had slowed to a trickle. Mines closed, families starved, and in their desperation, people began to disappear, not all at once. Not in ways that drew immediate attention, just one person here, another there, always near the same place. Always after sundown, the place was called Devil's Creek. Now, before we go further, understand this. Devil's Creek wasn't always called that. Old county maps from the 1880s show it as Devlin's Creek, named after an Irish settler who'd panned for gold there in the 1850s. But by the time our story begins, everyone from the county sheriff to the children who dared each other to venture near its banks knew it by its darker name. And they knew the rule: never, under any circumstances, approach Devil's Creek after the sun goes down. This wasn't superstition in the way city folks might dismiss mountain beliefs. This was practical knowledge, passed from parent to child with the same gravity as warnings about rattlesnakes or unstable mine shafts. This was survival information, earned through blood and loss, because people who ignored this warning didn't come back. The creek itself winds through a narrow valley in Harlan County, about 7 miles southeast of the town of Cumberland. It's not a large waterway in summer. You could cross it in 3 strides without wetting your knees. The water runs clear over smooth river stones, bordered by thick stands of hemlock and white pine that create a perpetual twilight even at noon. The valley walls rise steeply on both sides, blocking the sun for all but a few hours each day. In spring, when snowmelt swells the creek, the water moves fast enough to drown a man. In winter, it freezes solid, and the ice makes sounds like distant screaming as it shifts and cracks. But it's the cave that matters most to our story. About 2 miles upstream from where the creek crosses the old logging road, there's an opening in the limestone cliff face. Not large, maybe 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, easy to miss if you didn't know where to look. The locals called it the Devil's Throat. And that's where our story truly begins. To understand what happened at Devil's Creek, you must first understand the world that surrounded it. Harlan County in the 1930s was a place where America's promises had turned to ash. The coal companies had arrived decades earlier with grand assurances: steady work, good wages, company towns where families could thrive. And for a time, it seemed true. The mountains literally fueled the nation's growth, their black veins torn open to feed steel mills and power plants across the industrialized North. But the Depression changed everything. Mines shuttered overnight. Company stores extended credit until families owed more than they could ever repay. Men who'd spent their lives underground found themselves jobless, their lungs already destroyed by coal dust, their prospects non-existent. The company towns became prisons of debt. Families lived in tar paper shacks with dirt floors, surviving on whatever they could hunt, trap, or grow in the Rocky Mountain soil. There, in those distant mountains where the outside world seemed to exist in another dimension, communities lived virtually isolated from the rest of civilization, connected only by dirt trails that became impassable rivers of mud during the endless months of rain. The nearest town of any size was Cumberland, population 800 souls, and it was more than a day's walk from the upper reaches of Devil's Creek Valley. Law enforcement was sparse. Sheriff Raymond Hooper covered an area of over 400 square miles with just 2 deputies. Communication was by telephone where lines existed, by horseback messenger where they didn't. Justice, when it came at all, came slowly. Into this landscape of poverty, isolation, and desperation, something dark took root. The pattern began in the winter of 1933, though no one recognized it as a pattern at the time. On January 14th, a coal miner named Thomas Riddle left his family's cabin to check his rabbit traps before nightfall. The traps were set along Devil's Creek, about a mile upstream. Thomas was 41 years old, a careful man known for his reliability. His wife, Sarah, expected him back within an hour. He never returned. Sarah waited through the night, telling herself he'd sheltered somewhere when darkness fell, that he knew the mountains too well to risk the trails after dark. But when dawn came gray and cold, and Thomas still hadn't appeared, she walked to the nearest neighbor, 2 miles through snow, to raise the alarm. A search party of 11 men combed the creek valley for 3 days. They found Thomas's rabbit traps undisturbed. They found his tracks in the snow leading upstream toward the cave, and then the tracks simply stopped. Not in a place where the ground was too hard to hold prints, not where wind might have obscured them. They stopped in soft snow, as if Thomas Riddle had been plucked from the earth by invisible hands. The searchers found no body, no blood, no signs of struggle, nothing. Sheriff Hooper concluded that Thomas must have fallen into the creek, swollen with winter runoff, and been swept downstream. Never mind that the searchers had walked both banks for miles. Never mind that a drowned body would have snagged on rocks or logs. The official report listed Thomas Riddle as accidentally drowned, and the case was closed. Sarah Riddle knew better. She'd lived in those mountains her entire life. She knew every whisper, every superstition, every dark legend that mothers used to frighten children into obedience. And she knew that Devil's Creek had claimed her husband. She moved away 3 months later, leaving everything behind. She never spoke publicly about what she believed happened to Thomas. Over the next 4 years, 6 more people vanished near Devil's Creek. March of 1934, Jacob Hensley, age 23, disappeared while hunting. Last seen heading upstream just before dusk. Never found. September of the same year, Martha and Illy Boggs, a married couple in their 50s, went to gather wild ginseng valuable enough to sell for desperately needed cash. They told their daughter they'd be back before supper. Neither was ever seen again. The following spring, 2 teenage boys, Daniel Foster and James Mackey, vanished after accepting a dare to spend the night near the cave. Their families found their camp the next morning. The fire was cold. The boys were gone. Their footprints led toward the cave mouth and didn't return. Then, in the autumn of 1937, something changed. A young woman named Rebecca Cole survived. Rebecca was 19 years old, newly married to a farmer named William Cole. They lived in a cabin about 3 miles from Devil's Creek. On October 7, 1937, Rebecca went to wash clothes in the creek despite her husband's warnings. She'd lived her whole life nearby and had never actually seen anything dangerous there. The sun was still up. She'd be fine. She was kneeling by the water, scrubbing a shirt against a flat rock, when she heard the voice. A man's voice, she would later tell Sheriff Hooper, calling her name, coming from upstream, from the direction of the cave. Rebecca Cole. She stood, confused, The voice was familiar somehow, though she couldn't place it. It had a quality that made her want to follow it, to discover its source. She took 3 steps upstream. Then she saw the sun. It was touching the ridge tops, minutes from setting. The spell, if that's what it was, broke. Rebecca ran. She ran harder than she'd ever run in her life, abandoning her washing, her basket, everything. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. And she didn't stop running even then, crawling when she had to, pulling herself up to stumble forward. She reached her cabin just as full darkness fell. William found her collapsed on their porch, sobbing, unable to speak. When she finally told him what had happened, he gathered 3 neighbors and went to the creek at first light. They found Rebecca's washing basket. They found the wet shirts spread on the rocks, and they found footprints. Not Rebecca's delicate prints, large boot prints, size 11 or 12, pressed deep into the mud. The prints came from the direction of the cave. They approached to within 10 feet of where Rebecca had been working. They stopped there for a long moment. The boots had sunk deep, as if someone had stood watching. Then the prints turned and walked back upstream, back to the cave, back into darkness. Rebecca's testimony changed everything. Here was someone who'd survived, who could speak to what the others might have experienced. Sheriff Hooper interviewed her 3 times, taking detailed notes. He was a practical man, skeptical of mountain superstitions, but he couldn't dismiss the physical evidence. Someone was at Devil's Creek, someone who knew the victims' names, someone who called to them. On October 15th, 8 days after Rebecca's encounter, Sheriff Hooper organized an expedition to search the cave. He recruited 15 men, his 2 deputies, 8 miners experienced with underground spaces, 3 World War veterans who'd served in France, and 2 local men who claimed to know the cave system. They entered the Devil's Throat at 9 in the morning, carrying lanterns, ropes, and weapons. They were prepared for anything, or so they thought. What they found inside would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The cave entrance appeared unremarkable in daylight. Just another hole in the limestone cliff, one of thousands that pocked the Kentucky mountains. But as Sheriff Hooper and his men approached, they noticed something that made several of them pause. Silence, absolute, total silence. No birdsong, no insect buzz, no rustle of wind through the hemlocks. The forest around the cave mouth was as quiet as a tomb, and the air itself seemed heavier there, harder to breathe. Deputy Marcus Webb, a former coal miner who'd spent half his life underground, was the first to notice the smell. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "something ain't right. That's not just cave smell." He was correct. The odor emanating from the Devil's Throat wasn't the usual mustiness of limestone and bat guano. It was something else, something organic, something dead. Sheriff Hooper raised his lantern and stepped inside. The cave entrance opened into a chamber about 20 feet across and 12 feet high. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, creating small pools on the uneven floor. The walls were smooth limestone, worn by millennia of water flow. At the far end of the chamber, 2 passages branched off into darkness, one sloping down steeply to the left, another continuing roughly level to the right. The smell was stronger inside, much stronger. "We split into 2 groups," Hooper announced. 7 men down the left passage with Deputy Webb, 7 with me to the right. Last man stays here to guard the entrance and maintain communication if possible. Nobody volunteered to stay behind alone. Eventually, Thomas Pritchard, the youngest man in the group at 22, drew the short straw. He positioned himself just inside the cave mouth, where he could still see daylight, and watched as the others disappeared into the darkness. The passage to the right, which Sheriff Hooper's group followed, extended roughly 200 feet before opening into another chamber. This one was larger, perhaps 40 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadow above the reach of their lanterns. A small stream trickled through the center, barely ankle deep, and against the far wall, illuminated by the flickering lantern light, they saw the shrine. Someone had spent considerable time creating it. Bones were arranged in careful patterns along a natural shelf in the rock. Animal bones mostly, deer and bear and smaller creatures, but also something that Deputy Frank Hutchinson immediately recognized as human, a skull, then another, 3 in total, arranged in a triangular pattern. Around the skulls, scraps of cloth, bits of jewelry, a woman's hairbrush, a man's pocket watch. Personal items, trophies. Sheriff Hooper approached slowly, his lantern held high. The bones had been cleaned meticulously, almost lovingly. The skulls gleamed white in the lamplight. Dear God, someone whispered behind him, but Hooper's attention had moved beyond the shrine. There, carved into the limestone wall in letters 8 inches high, asterisk asterisk, the devil feeds at night, asterisk asterisk, asterisk asterisk 17, given asterisk asterisk, asterisk asterisk 17, taken asterisk asterisk, asterisk asterisk, more to come asterisk asterisk. The letters had been carved deep, the work of months or years. Below them, scratched in a different hand, hasty, desperate, were other messages. Asterisk, help us asterisk, asterisk, God, have mercy asterisk asterisk, he's coming asterisk, names too. Thomas Riddle, Martha Boggs, James Mackey, others they recognized from the list of disappeared. They were alive, said Deputy Hutchinson, his voice cracking. Jesus Christ, Sheriff, they were alive when they wrote these. Before Hooper could respond, they heard the scream. It came from deep within the cave, from the direction the other group had taken. Not a scream of fear or surprise, but of absolute, soul, deep terror. The kind of sound a man makes when he encounters something his mind can't process. Then silence. Then running footsteps, splashing through water, growing rapidly closer. 3 men burst from the left-hand passage. Deputy Webb and 2 of the miners, their faces pale as death in the lamplight. They were running as if hell itself chased them. Out, Webb gasped, everyone out, now. What did you, Hooper began. Now, but even as he shouted, they heard it. From the darkness of the left passage, moving fast. Footsteps. Heavy boots on stone, running with purpose, with rage, with terrible intent. And beneath the footsteps, a sound that raised every hair on Sheriff Hooper's neck, laughter. Low, wet, bubbling laughter that echoed and multiplied in the cave's confines until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The men didn't need further encouragement. They ran. They scrambled through the entrance chamber, grabbing young Pritchard on the way, and erupted into the blessed daylight like miners fleeing a collapse. They didn't stop running until they were 50 yards from the cave mouth, and even then several kept going, crashing through the underbrush in their panic. Sheriff Hooper, to his credit, forced himself to turn and look back at the cave. A figure stood in the entrance. Just stood there, silhouetted against the cave's darkness, watching them. Too far away to make out features, but the posture was wrong somehow. Too still, too patient, like a predator that knows its prey will return. After a long moment, the figure stepped backward into shadow and vanished. Back in Cumberland that evening, Sheriff Hooper gathered the scattered members of his expedition and took statements. What Deputy Webb's group had found in the left-hand passage was far worse than the shrine. The passage had descended steeply, requiring the men to brace themselves against the walls to avoid sliding. After roughly 300 feet, it opened into a large chamber, what miners would call a room, perhaps 60 feet across. They'd found the bodies there, Not all of them, not the 17 names carved on the wall, but 6. 6 people in various stages of decomposition, arranged in a circle on the cave floor like some obscene parody of a prayer meeting. Thomas Riddle was recognizable by the wedding band his wife had described. The Boggs couple lay side by side, their hands positioned as if they'd been holding each other when they died. The teenage boys, Foster and Mackey, appeared to have been dead less than a year. Their clothes were still intact. Their faces still bore features. But it was how they'd died that horrified the men most. They'd starved, slowly, deliberately. Each body bore evidence of restraint, rope marks on wrists and ankles, raw and deep. They'd been kept alive down there in the darkness, without food, given just enough water to prolong their suffering. The cave floor around them was scored with desperate scratch marks where they'd tried to dig, to escape, to do anything but wait for death. And standing watch over this circle of horror was a crude wooden chair. Someone had carried a chair 300 feet underground. Someone had sat in that chair and watched these people die. Deputy Webb's group had been measuring the distance from one body to another, trying to understand the arrangement, when they heard movement from a side passage they hadn't noticed. The scrape of boot on stone, a wet cough. Someone else was down there with them. That's when Private Ernest Lawson, one of the war veterans, raised his lantern toward the sound. The light fell upon a face peering around a stone column. Lawson never fully described what he saw. In his statement, he said only, "It didn't look right. The face was wrong. Like something had worn a man like a suit and hadn't quite figured out how to arrange the features." That's when he screamed. That's when they ran. And that's when whatever lived in Devil's Creek gave chase. Sheriff Hooper faced a dilemma. He had evidence of multiple murders. He had a suspect, still unnamed, but clearly living in or near the cave. He had legal authority to arrest, but he had 15 men who refused to enter that cave again, and he couldn't blame them. More concerning, he had no idea how many entrances the cave system might have. Whoever was down there could slip out after dark and vanish into the endless mountains. Or worse, could come hunting. That night, Hooper contacted the state police. He explained the situation carefully, understating nothing. To his surprise, the lieutenant he spoke with didn't dismiss his concerns. "We've had reports," the lieutenant said quietly. "Other places, other caves, never this many bodies, but similar circumstances. Give us 48 hours, we'll send men." The state police arrived 3 days later. 8 officers, a mining engineer to map the cave system, and 2 tracking dogs. They brought portable lights, weapons, and mining equipment to seal entrances if necessary. The engineer's name was Samuel Garrett, a lean man in his 50s who'd spent 30 years surveying coal mines. He examined the cave entrance with professional interest, noting the water flow and rock type. "Karst limestone," he announced. "Means there's probably an extensive system. Could be miles of passages. We'll need to be methodical." They entered at dawn on October 22, 1937. 15 armed men moving in a tight group, leaving markers to track their path, calling out to each other constantly to maintain communication. The shrine was still there. The bodies in the lower chamber were still arranged in their terrible circle. But the chair was gone, and fresh tracks led deeper into the mountain. For 3 days, they pursued the tracks through the cave system. The passages twisted and branched in bewildering complexity. Samuel Garrett mapped as they went, marking their route with chalk and twine. The tracks led them down, always down, deeper into the earth where the air grew thin, and the darkness seemed to have weight. They found evidence of long-term habitation. A side chamber stacked with preserved food, jars of beans and corn, dried meat, even whiskey. Another alcove contained books, dozens of them, their pages swollen with moisture. The books ranged from popular novels to medical texts to something that made the state police captain physically ill. Detailed anatomical drawings with handwritten notes about how long it took for various body parts to decompose in different conditions. They found journals too, 3 leather-bound volumes filled with small, precise handwriting. Sheriff Hooper confiscated them immediately, but not before reading the first entry, year 1933, January 12th. The first one came today, called by the voice. He followed so easily, like a child following candy. The Devil's Creek has chosen well. The hunger grows stronger. 17 is the number. 17 to open the door. 14 more to find. The handwriting was educated, flowing, almost beautiful. Whoever had written this was no illiterate mountain hermit. This was someone with learning, with patience, with a mind that worked in disturbing patterns. On the evening of the third day, October 24th, the tracking dogs caught a fresh scent. They bayed and strained at their leads, pulling their handlers down a narrow passage that required the men to move single file, their shoulders brushing both walls. The passage opened suddenly into a natural cathedral, a chamber so vast their lights couldn't reach the far walls. The ceiling arched overhead, covered in limestone formations like frozen waterfalls. The floor was smooth stone, worn by ancient water into gentle curves. And in the center of this magnificent space, lit by a circle of candles, stood the man they'd been hunting. He was younger than they'd expected, perhaps 35, maybe 40, clean, shaven, with dark hair going gray at the temples. He wore ordinary clothes, work pants, a flannel shirt, boots. Nothing about his appearance suggested monster. He could have been a shopkeeper, a clerk, a schoolteacher. When he spoke, his voice was calm, educated, almost friendly. "Gentlemen, I wondered when you'd arrive." The officers spread out, weapons raised. The man made no move to run. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, smiling slightly. "You're under arrest," announced Captain Morris of the state police, "for multiple counts of murder." Murder? The man tilted his head, considering. Is it murder to feed what's hungry? Is it murder to answer a call that's older than your civilization? "What's your name?" demanded Sheriff Hooper. The man's smile widened. "I've had many names, but you may call me Caleb." "Caleb Marsh." "Caleb Marsh," said Deputy Webb slowly. "That name? I know that name." "Of course you do," Marsh replied. "Your grandfather knew my grandfather. The Marsh family has lived in these mountains for 5 generations. We've always been here. We've always served." "Served what?" asked Captain Morris. Marsh gestured at the cave around them. "The old places, the deep places. Your people came here and saw mountains to hollow out, rivers to dam, forests to clear. My people came here and recognized what was already present. What was ancient, what was hungry." "You're insane," said Hooper flatly. "Am I?" Marsh's eyes glittered in the candlelight. "Then explain what calls to people at dusk. Explain why they come so willingly, why they follow voices they recognize. Explain why the old-timers warned your grandparents to avoid Devil's Creek after sundown, and their grandparents were warned before that, going back 200 years. He took a step forward. 3 guns clicked to full cock. "I didn't create what lives here," Marsh continued. "I merely tend it, feed it, keep it satisfied so it doesn't seek prey in the inhabited valleys. 17 souls every 20 years. That's the price for peace. I'm nearly done with this cycle. Just 3 more, and then it sleeps again." "You killed 17 people," said Captain Morris coldly. "I sacrificed 17 people," Marsh corrected. "There's a difference, and they died serving something greater than themselves. something that would consume hundreds if left unfed. I'm not a murderer, Captain. I'm a shepherd, a guardian, a necessary evil in a world full of unnecessary ones. The silence that followed was broken by Deputy Webb's voice, tight with barely controlled rage. You sat in a chair and watched them starve. You listened to them beg. For the first time, Marsh's composure cracked. Something dark moved behind his eyes. Yes, he said softly. I did, because the hunger demands suffering, not just death. Quick death doesn't feed it. They had to die slowly, in darkness, in despair. Their fear, their pain. That's what it consumes. That's what keeps it dormant. Jesus Christ. Someone whispered. He won't help you here. Marsh said, this place is older than your God. Captain Morris had heard enough. Take him. 2 officers moved forward with handcuffs. Marsh didn't resist. As they bound his hands, he looked directly at Sheriff Hooper. You should have left it alone, he said quietly. I was the only one who knew the prayers, the rituals. Now that you've taken me, who will feed the hunger, who will keep it satisfied, you think you've stopped something evil, Sheriff. You've just let it loose. They led him out of the cave as the candles guttered and died behind them. The trial of Caleb Marsh began on December 6, 1937, in the Harlan County Courthouse. The proceedings drew reporters from as far as Louisville and Cincinnati. The Devil's Creek Killer made headlines across Kentucky and beyond. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence. The bodies recovered from the cave, the journals documenting each killing in meticulous detail. The testimony of Rebecca Cole, who identified Marsh as the source of the voice that had called her name. Physical evidence, personal items from victims found in Marsh's underground chambers. But it was Marsh's own testimony that sealed his fate and disturbed everyone who heard it. He confessed freely, enthusiastically even. He described each victim, how he'd lured them, how long they'd survived, how they'd died. He showed no remorse. Instead, he spoke of his actions with the pride of a craftsman discussing fine work. Thomas Riddle lasted 9 days. He testified calmly. He was strong. He fought it longer than most, kept trying to reason with me, to appeal to my humanity. He offered me money he didn't have, promised me things he couldn't deliver. On the 8th day, he tried to chew through the ropes. He got 3 fingers bloody before he gave up. The courtroom sat in horrified silence. The Boggs couple, Martha and Ellie, they were different. They had each other. They tried to keep each other's spirits up, singing hymns, reciting scripture. It took 13 days for the first one to die. Ellie went first. Martha lasted 5 more days after that, and when she finally succumbed, she was still holding his hand. A woman in the gallery fainted. The judge called a recess. When testimony resumed, the prosecutor asked Marsh about his claims regarding something ancient living in the cave. Do you truly believe, the prosecutor asked, that there is some supernatural entity that required these sacrifices? Marsh smiled. Belief is irrelevant. It exists whether you believe or not. Come back to Devil's Creek in 1957 when the hunger wakes again. See what happens when no one tends it. See how many disappear then. So you're claiming you're not responsible. The prosecutor pressed, that you were compelled by some external force. Not at all, Marsh replied. I chose this path freely. My grandfather trained me, as his grandfather trained him. Someone had to do it. Someone had to bear the knowledge and the burden. I volunteered. Volunteered to torture and murder innocent people. Marsh leaned forward, his eyes intense. Define innocent. Thomas Riddle beat his wife. Martha Boggs stole from her neighbors. The teenage boys set fire to a barn for entertainment. I didn't choose people at random, prosecutor. I chose, carefully, those who wouldn't be grieved too deeply, those who'd already shown darkness in their souls. That doesn't give you the right. Rights? Marsh laughed. Who speaks of rights? I'm talking about necessity. about the mathematics of survival. 17 deaths every 20 years, or hundreds, perhaps thousands taken at random when the hunger grows. Uncontrollable, which would you choose? The jury deliberated for just 47 minutes. They returned a verdict of guilty on all counts, 17 charges of first-degree murder, plus additional charges of kidnapping and corpse desecration. Judge Marcus Thornton sentenced Caleb Marsh to death by hanging. Mr. Marsh, the judge said, you have committed acts of such depravity that this court struggles to find adequate words of condemnation. You claim to serve some dark purpose, to protect others through your horrific actions. This court rejects that claim entirely. You are not a guardian. You are a murderer of the worst kind, calculated, remorseless, and depraved. May God have mercy on your soul, though you showed none to your victims. Marsh stood calmly through the sentencing. As the bailiffs led him away, he called back to the courtroom, remember this date, all of you, December 6, 1937. Remember it in 1957, when the disappearances begin again, when they don't stop, when your children start hearing voices at dusk. Remember that you chose this. The courtroom doors closed behind him. Caleb Marsh was executed on March 17, 1938, at 6 in the morning. Kentucky state law required hangings to be conducted in the county where the crime occurred, so a gallows was erected in the Harlan County jail yard. 67 people attended as official witnesses. Many more gathered outside the jail, held back by a line of deputies. Some came seeking closure, families of the victims who needed to see justice done. Others came out of morbid curiosity, drawn by the sensational nature of the case. Sheriff Raymond Hooper was present, as was Captain Morris of the state police. They stood side by side as Marsh was led from his cell. He wore a clean white shirt and black pants. He'd shaved that morning. He walked steadily, showing no fear. When offered a blindfold, he declined. I want to see the sunrise, he said. I've spent so much time in darkness. Let me see the light one last time. The hangman positioned him on the trapdoor. As the noose was fitted around his neck, Marsh looked out at the assembled witnesses. It begins again in 1957, he said clearly. 20 years from my capture. That's how the cycle works. Feed it or suffer the consequences. You've made your choice. Any last words? Asked the warden. Marsh smiled. Listen for the voices at dusk. When they call your name, remember mine. The trap door opened. Caleb Marsh dropped. His neck broke cleanly. The hangman knew his craft. Death was instantaneous. They buried him in an unmarked grave on unconsecrated ground. No one said prayers. No one mourned. His name was struck from official records where possible, and the newspapers moved on to other stories. The case of the Devil's Creek killer was closed, but the story was far from over. On October 9, 1957, exactly 20 years after Rebecca Cole's encounter, a hunter named Douglas McKinney disappeared near Devil's Creek. He'd been tracking a deer, following it into the valley as the sun set. His hunting partner waited at their truck, growing increasingly worried as darkness fell. When McKinney didn't return by midnight, the partner called the sheriff. The new sheriff, Raymond Hooper, had retired 5 years earlier, organized a search. They found McKinney's rifle propped against a tree. They found his hat. They found tracks leading toward the old cave entrance. They didn't find Douglas McKinney. 3 weeks later, a woman named Sarah Hendricks vanished while gathering firewood. Then a teenage boy who'd been fishing. Then 2 more. By the end of 1958, 11 people had disappeared near Devil's Creek. The pattern was identical to the original killings. Always near sundown, always near the creek, always with no trace except tracks leading toward the cave. The state police returned, better equipped this time. They brought generators, powerful lights, and advanced caving equipment. They mapped the entire system over the course of 6 months. They found old evidence of Marsh's crimes, more bones, more journals. But they found no living suspect, no one maintaining the killing grounds, no chair, no shrine, no guardian. Just disappearances, just voices calling in the dusk. Fast forward to the present day. Devil's Creek still flows through its narrow valley in Harlan County. The cave entrance, the Devil's Throat, was sealed in 1963 with a concrete barrier and steel grating. Warning signs were posted, the area was declared off limits, the disappearances continued, not every year, not in predictable patterns, but regularly enough that locals keep count. The number varies depending on who you ask, but most sources agree. Between 1937 and the present, at least 47 people have vanished near Devil's Creek. The concrete barrier at the cave entrance has been broken through multiple times. Vandals, some say. Curious teenagers, urban explorers. The county repairs it, and within months it's broken again. People still report hearing voices at dusk. They still report an overwhelming compulsion to walk upstream toward the cave when they approach the creek in failing light. Most resist, some don't. In 1999, a team of paranormal investigators spent 3 nights camping near Devil's Creek. Their footage showed nothing unusual, just a beautiful mountain creek, pristine forest, the gentle sound of water over stones. On the 4th morning, only 2 of the 5 investigators returned to their vehicles. The other 3 were never found. Local search and rescue teams now refuse to operate in the area after 4 p.m. The policy is unofficial but universally observed. We don't have the budget to lose volunteers, one coordinator explained off the record, and we've learned that certain places have rules you ignore at your peril. Researchers have attempted to explain the Devil's Creek phenomenon through various means. The most persistent theory involves infrasound low-frequency sound waves below the threshold of human hearing that can cause feelings of dread, paranoia, and even hallucinations. The cave system, proponents argue, acts as a natural resonator. Wind passing through the complex network of passages could generate infrasound that affects anyone nearby, creating the sensation of voices and an unexplained compulsion to enter the cave. It's a reasonable theory, scientifically sound. Several other locations worldwide, including the Hauska Castle in the Czech Republic and certain caves in France, have demonstrated similar effects. But it doesn't explain the bodies arranged in careful patterns. It doesn't explain Caleb Marsh's detailed journals. It doesn't explain why disappearances occur in roughly 20-year cycles, or why they intensified after Marsh's execution. Psychological explanations have also been proposed: mass hysteria, cultural transmission of fear, the power of suggestion creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where people who believe they're in danger actually put themselves at risk through panicked behavior. Again, reasonable, again, insufficient, because the pattern holds even when people don't know the history. Tourists unfamiliar with the legend have vanished. Hikers using GPS who didn't even know they were near Devil's Creek have disappeared. The phenomenon doesn't require belief to operate. After the trial, investigators looked into Caleb Marsh's family history. What they found suggested his testimony about generational involvement might have been true. County records showed that Marsh men had lived in the area since the early 1800s. Census data revealed a pattern. Every 20 years, approximately 17 unexplained deaths or disappearances occurred within a 5-mile radius of Devil's Creek. The pattern held remarkably consistent across more than a century. Between 1815 and 1835, 19 deaths. Between 1835 and 1855, 16 deaths. Between 1855 and 1875, 17 deaths exactly. The pattern continued, precise as clockwork, until Caleb Marsh's arrest in 1937. Investigators also found family journals predating Caleb's own. His grandfather, Ezekiel Marsh, had kept similar records. Ezekiel's writings were less detailed but followed the same themes: the necessity of sacrifice, the hunger that dwells in deep places, the mathematics of survival. One entry from 1887 was particularly chilling. Taught young Caleb the prayers today. He learns quickly, more quickly than I did at his age. He understands the weight of what we do. He will be ready when my time comes. The work must continue. 17 every 20 years. Always 17. This is our burden, our duty, our curse. The family had been doing this for generations. Caleb Marsh wasn't an aberration. He was a tradition. Some researchers have proposed that the Marsh family itself created the legend to justify serial killing, that there was never anything supernatural about Devil's Creek. Just a family of murderers, passing down their depravity like an heirloom. This theory has significant support. It's the most rational explanation. It places responsibility squarely on human evil rather than invoking unknown forces. But it struggles to explain the post-1938 disappearances. After Caleb Marsh's execution, no other Marsh family members lived in the area. The bloodline ended. Yet the disappearances continued. If the Marshes had created the legend, why did it persist without them? Unless, of course, other families took up the practice. Unless the idea of ritual sacrifice to appease some ancient hunger proved attractive to other damaged minds. Unless the legend itself became a template that others followed. Or unless Caleb Marsh was telling the truth. Talk to anyone who's lived long-term in Harlan County, particularly in the valleys surrounding Devil's Creek, and you'll hear stories. Not dramatic tales of horror, but quiet accounts of unease, of moments that don't quite fit into rational frameworks. Margaret Owens, age 73, has lived her entire life within 10 miles of Devil's Creek. She's never been to the cave itself, her mother forbade it, and she's maintained that prohibition for her own children and grandchildren. It's not that I believe in devils, she told an interviewer in 2015. I'm a God-fearing Christian woman, but there are places in these mountains that feel wrong. You can sense it. Animals sense it too. Deer won't go near that valley at night. Dogs won't track there. After sunset, they'll pull against the leash, whine, do anything to avoid it. Animals know things we've forgotten. James Mitchell, a former park ranger who worked in the area for 12 years, reports similar observations. I've seen black bears run from that creek valley like something was chasing them. I've watched flocks of birds change direction mid-flight to avoid passing over it, and I've felt it myself. This pressure, like the air, is thicker there, like something's watching. I never investigated after dark. That wasn't cowardice, that was common sense. Even skeptics who have visited the area report discomfort. Dr. Patricia Walton, a geologist from the University of Kentucky, led a study of the cave system in 2008. Despite her scientific training and general skepticism about paranormal claims, she acknowledged feeling uneasy during the expedition. There's definitely something unusual about the acoustics, she stated in her published paper. Sound behaves strangely in those caverns. Voices echo in unexpected ways. Silence falls more heavily there than in comparable cave systems. Whether that's sufficient to explain the area's reputation, I can't say, but I can confirm that being in those caves produces a psychological response. You feel watched. You feel unwelcome. Several members of my team reported hearing their names called by the voices of family members, which we attributed to audio pareidolia, the brain pattern, matching ambient sounds into familiar voices. But it was persistent and disturbing enough that we ended our study 2 days early. The concrete barrier sealing the Devil's Throat has been destroyed and rebuilt 7 times since 1963. Each time, officials attribute the damage to vandals. Each time, no suspects are identified or charged. But in 2003, a security camera was installed near the cave entrance as part of a wildlife monitoring program. The footage from that camera has never been publicly released, but according to sources who have seen it, the barrier wasn't destroyed from outside. The concrete exploded outward, from inside the cave. The footage allegedly shows the barrier intact one frame, then shattered the next, with chunks of concrete hurling away from the cave mouth as if propelled by tremendous force. No human figures are visible, no equipment, just the sudden, violent destruction of several tons of reinforced concrete. The camera stopped functioning immediately afterward. When rangers investigated the following morning, they found the barrier destroyed and the camera's housing melted. Not burned, but melted, as if exposed to intense heat. The official explanation cited seismic activity and equipment malfunction. Harlan County is not in a seismically active zone, and no earthquakes were recorded that night. The camera manufacturer stated that the melting pattern was inconsistent with any known electrical fault. The barrier was rebuilt with steel and forced concrete. It lasted 8 months before being destroyed again. Between 2000 and the present, 16 people have vanished near Devil's Creek. 16, not 17. Every time the count approaches 17, law enforcement and locals hold their breath, waiting to see if the pattern will complete. The most recent disappearance occurred in October of 2023. A YouTuber named Brandon Mills, who ran a channel dedicated to investigating paranormal locations, hiked to Devil's Creek to film an episode. He posted on social media that he was approaching the cave entrance just before sunset, promising his followers the best footage yet. His camera was found 3 days later, still recording. The footage showed Brandon approaching the cave, making jokes about the legends, dismissing the warnings. Then, as the sun touched the horizon, his expression changed. "Wait," he said, suddenly serious. "Do you guys hear that?" He turned toward the cave. That's my mom. That's my mom's voice." How? He started walking toward the cave entrance, still filming. The footage showed him entering the Devil's Throat, his flashlight beam bouncing off limestone walls. His mother's voice, or something that sounded like it, called his name repeatedly, growing louder. "Mom, Mom, where are you? I'm coming." The footage continued for 17 more minutes. Brandon descended deeper into the cave system, following passages, calling out. Then his flashlight began to flicker. The battery shouldn't have been failing. He'd installed fresh ones an hour earlier. In the dying light, the camera captured something that's been analyzed frame by numerous researchers. A shadow moving against the cave wall, a shadow that didn't match Brandon's movements, a shadow that appeared to have too many limbs, arranged at wrong angles. Brandon screamed. Once, the flashlight died. In the complete darkness, the audio continued recording for another 8 minutes. Footsteps, breathing Brandon's panicked gasps, and something else, something slower, deeper, then dragging sounds. Then silence. The camera ran until its battery died, recording nothing but absolute darkness and perfect silence. Brandon Mills has never been found. His mother confirmed she'd been home in Ohio at the time, asleep, never called him. Couldn't have called him. He had no cell signal in that valley. 16, one short of 17. Despite official warnings and physical barriers, some locals still approach Devil's Creek, not out of curiosity or disbelief, but out of necessity. The creek provides the best fishing in the county. The surrounding forest contains valuable ginseng and other medicinal plants. The valley offers passage to hunting grounds beyond. People need to make their livelihoods, and they've developed their own systems for staying safe. The rules, passed down through generations and adapted over time, are specific. Never approach after 4 p.m. in winter or 6 p.m. in summer. Give yourself time to leave before sunset. Never go alone, always in groups of 3 or more. Never 17. Carry iron nails, horseshoes, tools. Old mountain belief, but universally observed. Don't respond if you hear your name called, especially if you recognize the voice. Never acknowledge it. Keep moving. If you feel compelled to enter the cave, recite the Lord's Prayer aloud. Keep reciting it until the compulsion passes. Don't look directly at the cave mouth when passing. Eyes on the path, eyes on your companions, eyes on anything else. Leave an offering tobacco, cornmeal, or whiskey poured on the ground at the valley entrance. Respect costs nothing, the old-timers say. Do these rituals work? The people who follow them survive. Whether that's causation or correlation is impossible to determine. But in communities where 47 people have vanished over 80 years, survival strategies become sacred regardless of their logical basis. What truly dwells in Devil's Creek? Was Caleb Marsh a delusional serial killer who crafted an elaborate mythology to justify his murders? Or was he, as he claimed, a guardian performing a necessary function? The rational answer is clear. Marsh was a monster. His crimes were human crimes, born of human depravity. The continued disappearances are tragic coincidences, perhaps inspired by copycat killers or attributable to the dangerous terrain and misleading acoustics. But rational answers don't explain everything. They don't explain the precise 20-year cycles that persisted for over a century. They don't explain why animals avoid the area. They don't explain the shadow on Brandon Mills's video, or the voices that perfectly mimic dead relatives, or the concrete barrier exploding from within. Sometimes the universe contains more than reason can accommodate. Sometimes the old stories, the ones kept alive in whispers, the ones that make educated people uncomfortable, contain truths that science hasn't yet developed tools to measure. Or perhaps that's just what people tell themselves because the alternative, that random, meaningless evil exists in pockets throughout the world, is too disturbing to accept. The debate continues in academic papers, on paranormal forums, in graduate theses, and late-night conversations. Meanwhile, in the mountains of eastern Kentucky, the creek continues to flow. The cave continues to exhale cold air that smells of stone and time and something else, something unidentifiable. And people continue to disappear. The story of Devil's Creek remains a disturbing reminder that some mysteries resist resolution. We want clear answers, monsters to condemn, victims to mourn, justice to celebrate. Caleb Marsh gave us a monster. His execution gave us justice, but the disappearances didn't stop, and that fact challenges every comfortable conclusion. Was Marsh telling the truth about an ancient hunger dwelling in those caves? Or did his crimes inspire something worse, a legend that attracts the damaged, the curious, and the doomed, ensuring that Devil's Creek's dark reputation perpetuates itself across generations? We may never know with certainty, but questions remain, haunting as any ghost. Why do the disappearances cluster in 20-year cycles? Why do animals avoid the valley at night? What was the shadow captured on Brandon Mills's camera? What force destroyed a concrete barrier from inside a sealed cave? And most troubling, if 16 people have vanished since 2000, who will be the 17th? To this day, Harlan County residents speak of Devil's Creek in hushed tones. To this day, search and rescue teams refuse to operate there after dark. To this day, when the sun begins to set over those ancient mountains, and shadows pool in the valley bottoms, people hurry home. They lock their doors, they keep their children inside, and on silent nights, when the wind carries sound through the hollows and the creek whispers over stone, people still report hearing voices. Voices calling names, voices that sound like mothers, fathers, lovers, friends. Voices promising comfort, promising reunion, promising answers to questions better left unasked. The old-timers say it's been this way since, before the first European settlers arrived. The Cherokee and Shawnee who lived in these mountains before them had their own names for Devil's Creek, their own warnings, their own stories of the hungry place that feeds at dusk. The darkness there is old, they say, older than nations, older than names, and it's patient. If this journey through one of Appalachia's darkest mysteries has resonated with you, if you find yourself pondering the line between rational explanation and inexplicable evil, then consider subscribing to this channel. There are many more stories waiting to be told, mysteries buried in time and shadow that deserve examination. Leave a like if this account provoked reflections that go beyond mere entertainment, and comment sharing your own perspectives. Do you believe in places that are fundamentally wrong? Can evil outlast the individuals who commit it? Where do we draw the line between psychological explanation and supernatural reality? Until next time, remember, not all darkness is metaphorical. Some places in this world hold genuine danger. Some warnings passed down through generations carry wisdom we ignore at our peril. Stay curious, stay skeptical. But above all, stay safe, and never, under any circumstances, approach Devil's Creek after sundown.